Hello, everyone. Hello, and welcome to our strategic conversation today with Cristina Gallach, State Secretary for Foreign Affairs and Ibero-America at the Spanish Foreign Ministry, now in Madrid. I'm Shada Islam. I'm Director for Europe and Geopolitics at Friends of Europe here in Brussels. I'm working from my apartment, teleworking, because we're still in a lockdown. And Cristina, you're in Madrid, also in a lockdown. In fact, Spain has had a very severe impact of COVID-19 and a very strict lockdown. Of course, you're coming out of those restrictions slowly and cautiously. Thank you very much to all of you who are joining us for these online strategic conversations. I see that they're very popular. You're joining us from across the world, and I want to say thank you very much for your support. You can take part in this conversation on Twitter, hashtag FOE debates, and that's how you can encourage us with your questions, your comments, and I will put them to Cristina when we start this conversation in a minute. Now, Cristina, once again, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. It's a true pleasure, Shada, to be with you and to be together with this global audience.
It's a global audience, and you know, we are separated geographically. Our barriers have sometimes gone up, but online and thanks to technology that works most of the time, we can come together to share our common concerns, talk about our common challenges and how we want to see the future. How are we going to come out of this COVID-19 crisis? Now, Cristina, you and I have known each other for many years. We were journalists together here in Brussels some time ago. Then, of course, you became spokeswoman for Javier Solana when he was NATO Secretary General, then High Representative. I was still a journalist. And then you went on to New York and you became Deputy Secretary General at the United Nations. You came back to Madrid. You became an advisor, High Representative for Agenda 2030. I became a think tanker, and now you are, of course, at the Foreign Ministry as State Secretary for Foreign Affairs and dealing with Latin America. And through this all, I have to say, Cristina, you've remained a good friend, a very kind colleague, and your openness and your generosity are appreciated not just by me, but so many people across the world. And here in Brussels, you're a star. You're a star worldwide as well, of course. So, Cristina, I always start off these conversations with a personal note because we are friends, but also we need to be more personal in this time of social distancing and physical distancing. So you are, of course, a state secretary, a high-flying diplomat. You're also a wife and mother, just like me. How is it for you to have these online relationships with your children and your husband? You're in Madrid and your family is here in Brussels.
True, Shada. This is a very special confinement because I'm confined at home alone and also in the office during all day. And my family, as you mentioned, live and my husband works in Brussels. My children are late teenagers, still studying. So we have this relationship, very much distance relationship through Skype, through Facebook, through FaceTime, etc. They are all doing well. They are taking care of themselves. Is a new experience for them that I'm not joining them during the weekends. I think family has not suffered. I hope so. I hope for all of us that many of us are separated. Family ties don't suffer. Of course, momentaneously it's hard in the evening, alone, it's difficult. Hopefully this will strengthen our relationship. Children might become a little bit more responsible on doing things by themselves. But it is true, those are hard times for many people and for also our families. And I think we have to try to do our best to ensure that when we progressively come back to normality, we are stronger human beings. And
absolutely.
I think that the moments of suffering, I think we are lucky. We have
Mm.
good health. I think the value of health has gone up so much now. And the first thing we see somebody, we ask, how are you? How are your family? How is your family? So I think this is an important change as well.
Absolutely right. Now, Christina, on this online discussion, we've talked about EU foreign policy and how COVID-19 is impacting on that. We've talked about Asia, we've talked about Africa, and today I want to talk to you about Latin America. Now, Latin America had gone into lockdown pretty quickly. I think the reaction has been very rapid, quite effective. But the news from the economic side is pretty dire. And I was reading today about the Economic Commission for Latin America saying that the shrinkage in the economy is going to be the worst ever in the history of Latin America. Latin America was, many countries were coming out, becoming middle income countries. So tell us a little bit about the impact as you see it and how you think we can, as Europeans, deal with it.
Yes, Shada, we are very worried, and we would like to come up with the adequate policies to help the whole continent, Central and Latin America, and the Caribbean islands as well. And the current crisis, worldwide crisis, comes at a time when the economies in Latin America were already very fragilized for a number of reasons. The reliance on minerals, the reliance on natural exports had gone down.
Mm,
The fact that in many countries they have been having for the last years economic growth which were stagnant. This created a number of problems. So they entered a process of political instability, important populistic movements.
mm,
So the pandemic comes at a moment that some of these tendencies can only be aggravated. So yes, they had done tremendous efforts at the beginning of the century on moving out from LDCs, the least developed countries, and graduating and entering a new category. This unfortunately, the pandemic will hit hard at them. So we are very much working with them. I think the alliance of support for middle income countries should be one of the areas that we ought to put together now that we are organizing new streams of pressure of action. There are a few issues that we are very worried. First of all, the fact that they rely on informality of work. Informal work is 70% in some cases, 40, 50 in others. And this is extremely, very much affected by the pandemic. So we need to move to formal work through support to micro enterprises or small enterprises. A very important issue, the divide, the digital divide. The countries that are strong on digitization have been able to move on better. And in Latin America, there is such in many areas, a low presence of digitization. So the divide has gone bigger. Students that don't have access to digitization have been very much affected by others. If this is already true in the Western world, in Europe, imagine in Latin America. Extremely important, the fragile health systems. Some of the countries have very weak systems of social security, but also weak system of public health. So
mm.
this is an area which we need to work and help them as well. So those are areas in which we ought to understand that they are very much important for middle income countries, and facilitating these countries the access of financial resources that are directed to these weakest parts, I think would be the best. These countries need less debt moratoriums than investments, than access to capital. And the international financial organizations ought to have this perspective. So we will try to help them on that. Of course, Spain, you have mentioned at the beginning, has been very hardly hit by the pandemic, but there is nothing that impedes us to construct a strong foreign policy which is based on solidarity, on joint action. So here we are going to work as much as possible with them.
No, thank you very much, Cristina. And I really appreciate the fact that you've talked about the plight of the middle income countries, because we are often talking, and rightly so, about the poorest and the need for debt relief. Excuse me. But I think it's so important that we also look at the countries that were really making their way up the ladder, graduating in some cases, as you were saying, but now the middle classes, which were always fragile, are being wiped out. And of course, the informal sector, which is so important in Africa, in Latin America, in Asia. I think we need to focus more on that as well. Thank you very much indeed. And in the end, you talked about international solidarity. And the fact of the matter is, we do talk about it. You and I believe in it. Many people do. But we also have economic nationalism and anti-globalization efforts and people against the entire idea of multilateralism. Now, Spain has joined many other countries in this Alliance for Multilateralism. And the statements that are coming out say it's this time that we need to reinforce multilateral organizations to bring us better health, better peace, and more security, more growth and development in this new phase of recovery, exiting from the lockdowns. What can Spain do to make that point even stronger, in a more stronger way on the global stage?
I think this is the example, the situation in which we are, is that unless we understand that we will come out of this pandemic together, and as long as there is one which is left behind, there is going to be no security because there is going to be no health for the citizens. And the only way to come out is to do it in and through the multilateral organizations. Unfortunately, we have seen many actions that have weakened these organizations, and our responsibility is to help these organizations focus on the critical issues. We have the experience in the recent past of bringing climate change at the center of the world's attention, thanks to the action of the activists, the action, of course, of the international organizations, and the plight that world experts have brought to the UN, UNFCCC, to UN Environment, etc., etc. So our desire for strengthening these organizations doesn't go without a very clear demand that these organizations have to be more accountable and have to be more efficient. It is not just because we believe in multilateralism, we do not demand of systems in these multilateral organizations that respond practically to the demands. We need them to be resourced. In fact, we have seen a defund, progressive defund of key global actors. And I think the health world system is a good example.
Right.
There have been criticisms about WHO. We will see how the process of accountability, one we have seen clearly in the next weeks, is being formulated. But it is also true that we need to start putting the elements of thinking what global reform these organizations need. The WHO system has already been weakened in the past, in many
Absolutely.
other pandemics, remained as fundamental in terms of formulation of normatives which have to be followed. And it is also clear that the WHO cannot, and it is not well equipped to force member states to do certain things. So
Right.
they need to have some robustness done. At the same time, there are a number of global organizations, public-private partnerships, which
Yes.
probably will become even more important because to structure a system of accessibility of vaccines, productions of vaccines, distribution, this is not only for public budget. This
Absolutely.
is for the whole international economic structures. So we want to work with them. In fact, it's now being put together an important effort of global organization, or at least G20 level organization, on how to produce, scale up, and distribute vaccines in an equitable way.
That's right.
I think this is clear, and
Right.
this demands discussions, and this demands a structure, and as well leadership. And we want to not only to participate for the sake of being there, but for the sake of enhancing this global vision that this is an area, global health, where we need to work together, public-private, but member states of the UN system now, in the year of the 75th anniversary of
75th
the United
anniversary.
Nations, ought to be, generous,
Yes.
at the same time, supportive to the global organizations.
No, absolutely. Thank you very much for pointing out of the 75th anniversary. And you also talked about the G20, which of course now has additional relevance and perhaps needs to be strengthened institutionally as well. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about Spain and the European Union. And of course, in the start of this crisis, there was some, let's say, bad blood between Spain and some other member states. There were complaints of lack of EU solidarity, took discussion about debt and bonds, etc. And your foreign minister, Arantxa Gonzalez, said we're all in the same boat. They're not first class and second class or third class voyagers on this trip. Has that sort of, let's say, disagreement become a little easier now? Are relations better now that the EU seems to be moving forward on some of these issues?
You know, Shada, very well. The U is a slow motion machine. Slow because, it's composed about many member states, 27, the institutions, etc. But the crises that we have been facing lately, in particular this one, is one that requires another type of a speed. And the unit of time definitely has changed in this occasion. And I
Mm,
think we are, one can never be satisfied, fully satisfied, but yes, we have been able to induce in the EU institutions, in other member states, this sense that we cannot just hold discussions forever and ever, because the decisions need to be taken. And I have to admit, at the beginning, we were very worried. Maybe at the moments we were bitter amongst each other, because there was this lack of appreciation that unless we go out together, we are not going to get the way out of the solution. I ought to say the last 2, 3 weeks, when there was a global appreciation that we needed to work together, things started to change. We have already a good package from the EU institutions, and which definitely will provide the fundamental instruments to fight the economic impact and the social impact. We have to ensure that governments have resources to face the social crisis that is coming out of the stopping of the economy, which had never happened before. And at the same time, I think we have the right mandate to the Commission now to produce ideas that would be the engines of the economic recovery after the turn now, the lockdown, which is which is so critical, so important now. So yes, I think we saw in the
Yeah.
background or in the front that
Mm.
crisis was so huge, and then the reaction was there. The risks of nationalism in Europe are still there, but
Yes.
we have to be convinced that uh, unless we come out with the right instruments, this this nationalism is going to delay the positive recovery. So
Recovery.
we have to work out closely amongst each other. Um, it was terrible when we saw that member states were blocking
Hmm.
exports of very needed.
It was. It was.
It's now. I think this is we sense some changes. Let me give you an example. We were quite impressed, because we read very closely the editorials of key media, in particular in Germany, expressing the idea that we ought to be Europe, and particularly Germany, had to be more open. So I think that reflected that the society was not in conformity with these nationalistic practices. We have to keep working. I think it's
Yes.
going to be hard,
Yes.
but we ought to say, we would like to say that, to see that we see light. We see light in this situation.
And we need the light. We need the light as we come out of this tunnel. And of course, the media plays a very important role in bringing healing wounds, in a sense, and showing how the public feels, and sometimes how disconnected politicians,
Yeah.
national leaders, may be from the politicians, from the people.
Let,
Questions come.
Charlotte, let me add something to this, which I thought it was quite explicit. The pandemic caught many European travelers,
Yes.
in many places in the world,
Yes.
and all the governments were eager to help bringing back citizens. The European coordination has worked so well that now you see we are in the winding down phase of the
Right.
citizens' return, but you see in many cases uh, flights organized by one country
Yes.
with travelers from several others that stop in three places before flying back to Europe. This is working well.
That's right.
This is thanks to the European Union, in a way, because when we have pockets of citizens, we call Brussels, and the mechanism functions, and we have results, and there is a
So that's
working together, the diplomats in different
right.
member states. This is very important,
Yes.
because well, there is no the consular activity is not part of the EU foreign policy,
Absolutely.
but
Yeah.
it's well coordinated. So
Yeah.
I think this is a value that now our citizens will see in being together, in working together in the European Union.
Thank you very much. Time is short now, but there is a very important question that I want to ask you, and it comes also from your female networks, your network of friends and colleagues in Europe, the Women in International Security, among others, WISE, that you know very well, and I'm now on their advisory committee as well, so I'm very proud of that. And the question obviously is, there have been lots of comments about how female leadership has been very important and the most effective in terms of coping and tackling COVID-19. There's talk about compassionate leadership, empathetic leadership, inclusive leadership from women. And I was just wondering your point of view, Cristina. Is that been something that has struck you as well? That women leaders, women's leadership, and a different kind of leadership in this very unusual crisis is needed to bring us all together and to tackle the pandemic?
I'm a convinced believer in foreign policy, which is feminist foreign policy, which can be practiced by men. In fact, I'm proud to say that our prime minister always says that he is proud of having a feminist government, not only with women that are feminists, but also with men. I truly think that foreign policy which cares about the planetary health and humans' health is fundamental. And maybe with a very practical approach, this is probably what some important women leaders have been able to project in this period of the pandemic. I also don't want to generalize to the extreme because some women leaders have not been also able as others. But yes, I think that a foreign policy that puts the individuals and puts the planet at the center of the attention is critical. And in this has been the approach that we have taken under the leadership of our Prime Minister and our Minister of Foreign Affairs, Arantxa Gonzalez, whom you know well. She's been leading a number of extremely new approaches in addressing crises. Let me give you an example. She gathered together digitally, telematic conversations, many or as many women ministers of foreign affairs as possible 10 days ago, the leaders of regions like the secretary generals of the Ibero-American, the African Union, Vera, the Pacific Islands, etc. And the main purpose was, let's ensure that we come out of this crisis with a gendered policy. We cannot come out in a with a gender blind approach. And this has been structured to presenting to the General Assembly General Assembly resolution to ensure that when we come out of the crisis, we care about gender equality, about women, about girls. The majority of health workers are women.
That's right.
Informal work is mainly performed by women. Women go out to the street and get some money and go back on a daily basis. And we saw what happened during the 2008 crisis, that those that lost the jobs more often than others, those that had to carry the burden of the families and bringing up families were women. So this is a fundamental approach. We are going to fight it through. I can tell you strongly in a way that we hopefully are not inspirational, but we make it clear that solutions lay in this type of foreign policy. And it's been very interesting because we have heard a strong support. These Alliance of Multilateralism, for the multilateralism, as the majority of ministers of foreign affairs are men, and they all are coming to this idea. So I think this is an important approach, and hopefully we will have a planning of the way out of the crisis and a shaping of a post-COVID world which will not be gender blind.
Thank you very much, Cristina. I left that question for last because I really wanted to end on that note that we cannot afford this time around. As we come out of the recovery, we rebuild our economies, our communities. We cannot afford that this should be once again a gender blind recovery, as you said. And the importance of women as workers, healthcare, informal sector, and those that have to actually go home and also deal with their families in these lockdown moments as well. Cristina, thank you so much for a very complete overview of what Spain is doing, and also for bringing the Latin American issue onto the table as well. That has been very important. Thank you very much indeed for joining our conversation. Next week, we have a discussion, a panel discussion on health and disinformation. This is not about geopolitics, it's about how misinforming people about health and miracle recovery cures, etc., is also harming the health systems and people's lives across the world. So please join us next week on Monday for that discussion. And on Tuesday, we are really privileged and delighted to have Vice President Swisha joining us for a conversation on democracy, demography, and the future of Europe. So thank you very much, Cristina, for coming
My
online.
pleasure.
Thank you for all your questions and on your online viewing of these strategic conversations. Stay safe and stay healthy. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye bye.